and welcome to this week's News Currents. Today is Wednesday, February 26th, 2025. Southwest 737 and small business jet have near collision at Chicago Midway Airport. A screenshot from the Streamtime live account on YouTube of the near collision between a Southwest 737 plane and a private business jet at Chicago Midway Airport. The 737 flight was arriving from Omaha, Nebraska, when the business jet mistakenly crossed the runway. The Federal Aviation Administration and National Transportation Safety Board says they're investigating a near collision on Monday between a Southwest Airlines 737 and a small business jet at Chicago's Midway Airport. Southwest Flight 2504 was arriving from Omaha. And attempting to land on runway 31 Center at Midway. The skies were clear and the 737 was inches from touching down when the business jet taxied across the runway from left to right. The 737 crew immediately throttled the engines up to initiate a go-around and flew over the jet. A Canadair Challenger 350, which was preparing to depart to Knoxville, Tennessee, one of the Southwest pilots asked the tower controller, "How did that happen?" In a statement, Southwest said the crew followed safety procedures and the flight landed at Midway without accident. Nothing is more important to Southwest than the safety of our customers and employees. The YouTube video recorded by Streamtime Live showed the near collision, which was timestamped at 8:48 a.m. Central Time. Striking video, right? I mean, the video is pretty compelling, said Eric Jones, an aviation professor at Lewis University outside Chicago. A different air traffic controller who was talking to planes taxiing at Midway had been in communication with the small business jet operating as FlexJet 560. Their interactions could be heard on a recording by liveatc.net. The ground controller told the pilot to hold short of runway 31 Center, meaning do not cross. The pilot repeated the instruction back, but got it wrong, saying his plane was cleared on taxi across the active runway. Then the controller then corrected him. Negative, cross runway 31 left. Hold short runway 31 Center. The pilot then said he understood the instruction to hold short and not enter runway 31 Center. Moments later, the pilot of the private jet crossed the runway as the Southwest jet was about to touch down. The ground controller said, "FlexJet 560, hold your position there. Your instructions were to hold short of runway 31 Center. There have been several recent high-profile aviation incidents. Those include a Delta Airlines regional commuter jet that crashed and rolled upside down February 17th while attempting to land in Toronto. No one died. In January, there was a mid-air collision between an American Airlines regional commuter jet and U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter, which killed all 67 on board both aircraft near Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. A plane crash in Alaska killed all 10 aboard, and a medical plane crash in Philadelphia killed 7 people. All of these incidents, like Monday's near collision, are under investigation. But they come as there increasingly scrutiny on the nation's air transportation system, including a shortage of air traffic controllers, as the Trump administration continues to eliminate staff at the FAA and other transportation agencies. New U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said last week his team is ready for the challenge. America deserves safe, state-of-the-art air travel, and President Trump has ordered that I deliver a new world-class air traffic control system that will be envy of the world. Why the good news about the Mpox outbreak of 2025 isn't really good after all. Lesions can be seen on this Mpox patient in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the epicenter of an outbreak in Africa. Dr. Jean Kaseya has a warning for the world. We are playing with fire. Kaseya is a Director General of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He's talking about Mpox, a virus that causes painful blisters and can be fatal. For much of the world, Mpox, formerly known as monkeypox, seems like a virus from a few years ago. There was a global outbreak in 2022 and 2023, but the virus is no longer circulating as widely in Europe and the US. However, large swaths of Africa are in the midst of a major outbreak. The epicenter is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with more than 2,000 suspected cases reported each week for months, according to Africa CDC. There seemed to be encouraging news at the end of January, when the number of new cases dropped suddenly, but Mpox trackers are not celebrating. This decrease in terms of cases is not the reality, says Kaseya. Instead, he says this is a sign that the ability to monitor and tally new cases has been interrupted. He attributes this to 2 things: the combination between insecurity and lack of funding. The insecurity he's referring to is in eastern DRC, a hotspot in the Mpox outbreak, where rebel forces have taken control of key areas. The violence has interrupted Mpox control and reporting work. The lack of funding is the result of the abrupt freeze in U.S. foreign aid, instituted after President Trump took office on January 20th, along with the decision to fire or place on leave most of the 10,000 people working for the U.S. Agency of International Development. Almost all the agency's work has stalled, including critical parts of the Mpox response effort. Trump also ordered the U.S. to leave the World Health Organization and stop communicating with WHO officials who have played a critical role in Mpox containment. It's like watching a train wreck in real time and not being able to do a thing about it, says a healthcare worker formerly part of the U.S. response team. The worker spoke on the condition of anonymity for fear of retribution from the federal government. The outlook before Trump's inauguration. The global community rallied after both Africa CDC and WHO declared the Mpox outbreak in Africa a public health emergency in August 2024. Over $1 billion was pledged to the control effort by countries across Africa and Europe, as well as Japan and the U.S. According to Africa CDC, President Biden promised $500 million as well as 1 million Mpox vaccine doses. The hope was to stop this outbreak of the virus and prevent it from spreading to other parts of the world. However, the DRC can be a challenging place to fight an infectious disease. It's an enormous country with poor road networks. And a hotspot in the outbreak is in the war-torn East, where overcrowded camps for displaced people are common. The Mpox virus spreads through sexual contact, as well as close contact, even via bed sheets. The U.S. plays an outsized role in the public health of the DRC. Last year, the U.S. provided almost 70% of all humanitarian aid going to the country, sending $965 million to the DRC, according to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And when it came to Mpox response, the U.S. funds have supported a wide range of efforts, from training lab technicians to providing diagnostic testing, tests to supplying gloves and gowns for health workers, to working with veterinarians for disease surveillance in animal populations. Then, in late January, the campaign to quash the virus was interrupted, a turning point for the worst. On January 27th, M23, a rebel group that the United Nations says is backed by Rwanda, swept into Goma, a city in the eastern DRC that has been a hub for disease response efforts. Intense fighting engulfed the city for several days, and early UN estimates suggest a few thousand people were killed. From one day to another, everything just collapsed, says Pauline Nikwoseo, Chief of Field Operations for UNICEF in the DRC. UNICEF is the humanitarian agency funded and operated by the United Nations. Nikwosu, who was traveling when the violence erupted, says the violence didn't just pause Mpox response efforts. It likely made the outbreak significantly worse. That's because the vast majority of Mpox patients in isolation wards fled to seek shelter from the fighting. After the fighting erupted, we managed to locate only 15 Mpox patients. So the rest are probably living within the community with a huge risk of contamination, says Nicosio. This is a very big risk in terms of public health. Africa CDC reports that at least 400 Mpox patients fled. Nicosio adds that the risk of spreading the virus is particularly big because the fighting meant many people lost access to clean water or electricity. Even if aid workers could locate all the Mpox patients who fled, Nicosio says it's unclear where they would go now to be isolated and make sure they don't spread the disease to others. Six of the 7 Mpox treatment centers have been looted and totally destroyed. Including 2 supported by UNICEF, he says. All the stocks of supplies, treatment, medicine, mattresses, tents, everything was looted. Dr. Mike Ryan, director of the WHO's Health Emergencies Program, says the violence has been a major setback. All of the investment we've made over the last number of months to establish Mpox surveillance, Mpox control, Mpox vaccinations, all of that is interrupted, on hold, and impossible to continue, he says. Flying blind. At the same time, as the security situation in eastern DRC deteriorated, President Trump froze almost all of U.S. foreign assistance. While the judge has ruled that the funds should start flowing again, and that the administration has issued waivers for certain life-saving activities, including the campaign against Mpox, the aid world has faced major upheavals. With abrupt stop work orders and terminated contracts. Public health experts say there are at least 2 areas where the impacts of the aid freeze or are already being felt on the Mpox response. First, the vast majority of the Mpox vaccines pledged by the U.S. are stuck in a warehouse, while the vaccines were donated by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. USAID was facilitating the transfer to the DRC, and so the stop work orders halted the process. According to an individual who was working on the process and spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to speak publicly. In order for the vaccination donation to continue in the DRC, this individual says HHS needs to release the vaccines, which involves the Trump administration affirming the donation, and USAID leadership needs to approve for funds to be dispersed to partners who would then help pay for the operational costs associated with the vaccine transfer. Second, the U.S. had been funding the secure transportation of suspected Mpox samples from clinics to labs for testing, but no longer. We are scaling up the equipment for laboratory capacity, but the transportation of samples has become a nightmare. Says Dr. Nagashi Gongo, head of the Africa CDC's Incident Management Support Team based in DRC. Ngongo says his team has documented a steep drop in the testing rate. The proportion of suspected cases where there is testing to confirm the diagnosis, even in parts of the country where violence has not disrupted Mpox response efforts. The U.S. in particular had been putting a lot of funding and effort into strengthening the surveillance. Without this piece, we're blind. You're flying blind in outbreak response, says an individual who has worked in the U.S. response and requested anonymity for fear of retribution. There has been a waiver granted by the U.S. government for Mpox response to continue despite the freeze in foreign aid. NPR obtained an internal memo sent to USAID staff from Mark Lloyd, who was performing the duties of assistant administrator for the USAID Bureau of Global Health. On February 13th, he wrote that rapid emergency response is continuing for disease like Mpox. This includes detection, prevention, and containment efforts, such as the following activities: risk information for affected populations, active surveillance, infection prevention and control, support for testing, case management and treatment, and supply of medical countermeasures. However, restarting such activities has proved difficult. The payments have not resumed for Mpox response. There are currently no American staff at the USAID mission in the capital of the DRC, and Trump's order for the CDC officials not to communicate with WHO is still in place. The White House did not respond to requests for comments, and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention declined an interview request. The press line for USAID rang busy. NPR sent a request for comment to the State Department. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is acting administrator of the USAID. The questions covered vaccine donations, transport of suspected Mpox samples, and the impact of disruptions in the U.S. Aid on the Mpox outbreak. The request was not answered in time for a publication deadline. It's not just Mpox that is being impacted. The public health experts warn. but a whole host of health threats. That the DRC is confronting right now, from measles to cholera to widespread malnutrition. Kenya Kaseya worries that deteriorating health situations could be an entry point for a new pandemic, he says. DRC has a very fragile health system, and you say it is an integral part of this fabric that had already stretched very, very thin, says Annie Rimoin, a professor of epidemiology at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health, who has worked on mpox in the DRC for decades. Without U.S. support, there will be disastrous setbacks for health in the DRC, and because diseases don't respect borders, she worries. Those setbacks could be felt elsewhere in the world, too. Trump introduces a green card for the rich, the gold card. President Trump speaks to reporters as Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick looks on in the Oval Office on February 25th, 2025. President Trump said he is planning to introduce a new visa to attract rich foreigners to America, something he calls a gold card. For $5 million, people will be able to apply to become lawful permanent residents. Trump said the program would be rolled out in 2 weeks, would bring in very high-level people, and said the proceeds of the program could help pay down the deficit. It's going to be a route to citizenship, and wealthy people will be coming into our country by buying this card. They'll be wealthy, and they'll be successful, and they'll be spending a lot of money and paying a lot of taxes. Trump told reporters at an unrelated event in the Oval Office on Tuesday. Trump's Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, called it the Trump's gold card. And it would effectively replace the current EB-5 immigrant visa, investor visa. That program gives residency to foreigners who invest at least $1.05 million in new businesses that creates jobs, or $800,000 if the business is in a rural area, high unemployment area, or an infrastructure project. Lutnick told reporters the EB program was full of nonsense, making make-believe and fraud. He emphasized the applicants for the gold card would be vetted. Asked by a reporter whether Russian oligarchs could apply for gold cards, Trump said, seemingly tongue-in-cheek, "Yeah, possibly. Hey, I know some Russian oligarchs that are very nice people." Joy Reid fired from MSNBC amid network shakeup. Joy Reid speaks in New Orleans in 2024. Political commentator and television host Joy Reid has been fired from her position at MSNBC, where she anchors her show, The Readout. The move comes as the network is restructuring its program. Joy Reid is leaving the network, and we thank her for her countless contributions over the years, MSNBC President Rebecca Cutler said in a memo to staff. Reid's final show was on Monday. Her work has been recognized with several esteemed honors, including most recently the 2025 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding News Series. In the coming weeks, Rotating Anchors will host The Hour. In a statement on Blue Sky, Reed thanked her supporters. I just want to say thank you to everyone who has reached out with kindness and encouragement, both personally and in these social media streets. She wrote, so very proud of the Readout at joymsnbc.com team, who are truly family and of all of our supporters and friends. Reed, who is Black, has been outspoken voice in progressive politics and a sharp critic of President Trump. In a recognized Zoom interview with the organization Win with Black Women on Monday, Reed broke down in tears, describing the anger and disappointment she felt at losing her job. But in the end, where I really land, and where I've landed on today, is just gratitude, Reed said, wiping away tears. Not just because people who would take the time to get on a call like this or to take care of me. But also that my show had value. She added that she was not sorry for being outspoken on issues including the Black Lives Matter movement and objecting to the war in Gaza. I am not sorry I am not sorry I stood up for those things, because those things are of God, she said. Reed's firing takes one of the most high-profile Black women off the network, at a time when the Trump administration has made attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Longtime network host Rachel Maddow said on her show Monday that Reed's layoff feels indefensible. I think it's a bad mistake to let her walk out the door. She said, it is also unnerving to see that on a network where we've got two non-white hosts in primetime. Both of our non-white hosts in primetime are losing their shows, as is Katie Phang on The Weekend. MSNBC canceled the Katie Phang show as part of its shakeup, along with Jose Diaz-Balart reports. Both Phang, who is Asian, and Jose Diaz-Balart, who is Latino, will remain with the network, according to Kudel's memo. In a Sunday evening tirade on Truth Social, Trump celebrated Reed's firing while broadly criticizing the network. Low-Life chairman of Comcast, Brian Roberts, the owner of Ratings Challenged NBC and MSDNC, has finally gotten the nerve up to fire one of the least talented people in television, the mentally obnoxious racist Joy Reid, Trump wrote. Based on her ratings, which were virtually non existent, she should have been canned long ago, along with everyone else who works there. Among other changes at the network, Simone Sanders Town said, Michael Steele and Alicia Mendez, who currently co-host The Weekend, will move to a new weekday program. And Jen Psaki, a former White House press secretary under the Biden administration, was moved to primetime weekday slots. Federal agencies still can't agree on "What did you do last week?" email. President Trump delivers remarks during a joint news conference in the East Room at the White House on February 24th. Federal agencies were split on whether employees should comply with Elon Musk's directive to list 5 accomplishments in the past week, sowing more confusion as the midnight deadline for responding loomed. According to emails seen by NPR, as the agency overseeing the request appeared to issue conflicting guidance on Monday. Over the weekend, officials at the Departments of Defense, State, Homeland Security, and Energy told workers not to respond to the government-wide "What did you do last week?" email sent by the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, on Saturday. At the Department of Homeland Security, they contradicted earlier guidance from leaders at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which are both housed within DHS. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, staff were initially told to reply, but then received a Sunday evening email asking them to pause responses pending additional guidance. Late Monday, a third email told employees there is no HHS expectation that HHS employees respond to OPM, and there is no impact to your employment with the agency if you choose not to respond. For those who chose to respond, the department advised them not to name other HHS employees they worked with, matters they are working on, or specific grants or contracts. Assume that you write will be read by malign foreign actors and tailor your responses accordingly, the email warned. Meanwhile, agencies, including the Departments of Treasury, Veteran Affairs, Commerce, and Interior, instructed their employees to respond with a range of instructions on how to do so, while also reminding them not to share classified information. The internal emails were shared with NPR by current and former government employees who wanted to remain anonymous because they fear retaliation by the Trump administration and in some cases are still working at agencies where they are not authorized to share information. By late Monday afternoon, the OPM updated its instructions for agencies according to messages circulated at HHS and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, in a memo obtained by NPR. EEOC said that OPM told agencies to communicate to staff that any employee response to the email is voluntary and that not responding will not be considered a resignation. But in a guidance note released publicly by OPM later Monday, Charles Ezel, the agency's acting director, did not respond to an email was voluntary. Instead, Ezel wrote only that agencies should review responses and evaluate non-responses, and that the agency leaders may exclude personnel from this expectation at their discretion. He added that agencies should consider any appropriate actions regarding employees who fail to respond to activity accomplishment requests. It is agency leadership decision as to what actions are taken. The latest OPM guidance came as Musk and Trump claimed that those who did not respond were at risk of losing their jobs. On Monday, Musk posted on X that federal workers had another chance to comply or face being fired. Trump, speaking at the Oval Office on Monday, made unfounded claims that some federal workers aren't answering the emails because they don't even exist. And even if you don't answer, like you're sort of semi-fired or you're fired, because a lot of people are not answering because they don't even exist, he said without giving evidence. Trump added that agencies that told workers not to respond, include the State Department and the FBI, did so in a friendly manner. They don't mean that in any way compatibly with Elon. They're just saying there's some people that you don't want to really have them tell you what they're working on last week, the president said. OPM did not respond to NPR's request for comment or further clarification. Questions over who is in charge. The divided response among federal agencies is the most visible sign of pushback by some officials, including at the most powerful cabinet agencies that deal with national security. To Musk's aggressive reshaping of the government through his Department of Government Efficiency efforts, that includes the State Department, where a senior official told staff that the department would respond on its own behalf. According to a screenshot of the communication obtained by NPR, no employee is obligated to report their activities outside their department chain of command, the official's email said. Energy Secretary Chris Wright also asserted his department's authority to manage his staff in a message to employees on Sunday that NPR has seen. The Department of Energy is responsible for reviewing the performance of its personnel and will conduct any review in accordance with its own procedures, Wright wrote. When and if required, the department will provide a coordinated response to the OPM email. His email used identical language to a message sent by the Defense Department the same day and also seen by NPR. The shifting and at times contradictory guidance has left many federal workers confused and asking who is in charge. According to multiple interviews by NPR with those affected, they described a weekend of chaos, sparked first by an X post from Musk previewing the email and warning that failure to respond will be taken as resignation, and then by OPM email itself, which included no such ultimatum. My entire weekend has been stress-filled ball of crazy. No one seems to know who is running the country, and no one knows what we are supposed to do, said one federal employee who had received a series of changing instructions from supervisors on whether to comply with the request. This person spoke on a condition of anonymity because they are still employed by a federal agency and fear retaliation in their job. Despite OPM purported Monday guidance that responding is voluntary, some federal workers feel they have little choice. I hate to comply, but I feel it's safer to respond, said another federal employee who also spoke to NPR in condition of anonymity due to fear of retaliation. Whiplash is an accurate description of micromanagement from a shadow office, they added. Unions update legal action. Many federal workers are covered by civil service protections that prevent them from being fired without cause. Adding to the confusion, at least some contractors who do work for the government but are not federal employees also received the email asking for their output. NPR has learned these contractors are not included in data that tracks federal workforce data and are not hired or fired directly by the government. Coalition groups, including labor unions, has asked a federal court in San Francisco to temporarily block the Trump administration from firing probationary employees and from soliciting responses to OPM's email. The lawsuit, originally filed on February 19th, argues that OPM has no authority to manage employees of federal agencies other than its own. U.S. District Judge William Alsup gave the government until 10 a.m. Wednesday to file its opposition and scheduled a hearing for Thursday afternoon.